I never thought I would be the kind of person to check my property deed, but that morning when I found a certified letter from the county assessor's office stating that my 20 acres of land had been transferred to someone named Brenda Whitfield, I knew something had gone horribly wrong. My name is Samuel Anderson, and I had purchased this beautiful piece of land outside of Asheville, North Carolina 3 years ago, with money I had saved from 15 years of working as an electrical engineer. The property was my retirement dream, a place where I could build a modest home, raise chickens, maybe plant some apple trees. I had plans drawn up, permits pending, and a construction crew scheduled to break ground in 2 months. Now, according to this letter, none of that mattered because apparently I did not own the land anymore. I sat at my kitchen table in my rental house downtown, reading the letter over and over again. The words did not change no matter how many times I looked at them. Property transfer recorded on March 15, 2026. New owner, Brenda Whitfield. Previous owner, Samuel Anderson. The transfer had supposedly happened 2 months ago, and I had no idea who this woman was or how she had managed to steal my property right out from under me. My hands were shaking as I pulled out my filing cabinet and found the original deed. It was right there, recorded properly, notarized, everything legal and binding. I owned 20 acres of prime land off Highway 191 with mountain views and a creek running through the back portion. I had paid $230,000 for it, cash, no mortgage. How could someone just take it? I called the county clerk's office immediately. The woman who answered sounded tired and disinterested until I explained my situation. Then her tone changed completely. "Sir, you need to come down here right away," she said. "And you need to bring your original deed, your driver's license, and any documentation you have about your property purchase." I was at the county building in less than 30 minutes. The clerk who helped me was a middle-aged woman named Patricia, who looked genuinely concerned as she pulled up my property records on her computer. "This is very unusual," she said, squinting at the screen. "The transfer was filed by a Brenda Whitfield, and she presented what appeared to be a quitclaim deed signed by you." "I never signed anything," I said. "I do not even know who this woman is." Patricia clicked through several more screens, then picked up her phone. "I am calling our fraud investigation unit. This looks like identity theft and deed fraud. Do not worry, Mr. Anderson. We take this very seriously." While we waited, Patricia printed out copies of both deeds for me. When I saw the signature on the fraudulent quitclaim deed, my blood ran cold. It looked similar to my signature, but it was not quite right. Someone had practiced forging my name, probably tracing it from some document they had obtained. A man in his 50s wearing a polo shirt and khakis entered the office. He introduced himself as Robert Chen, the chief investigator for the county clerk's fraud unit. "Mr. Anderson, I have been reviewing your case," he said, shaking my hand firmly. "This is the third incident we have had this year involving property fraud, and interestingly, all 3 cases seem to connect to the same homeowners association." "Homeowners association?" I asked. "My property is not part of any HOA. It is unincorporated county land." Robert's expression turned grim. "That is what makes this particularly brazen. Brenda Whitfield is the president of Meadowbrook Hills HOA, which is about 2 miles from your property. She has been trying to expand the HOA's boundaries for years, claiming that nearby properties should fall under their jurisdiction, but they cannot just claim property that does not belong to them," I said. "No, they cannot," Robert agreed. "Which is why Mrs. Whitfield appears to have taken a more direct approach. She filed a fraudulent deed transfer, and based on our preliminary investigation, she has been paying the property taxes on your land for the past 4 months, probably to establish a paper trail that makes it look like she is the rightful owner." I felt sick. "So what happens now?" "Now we investigate, and if we find evidence of fraud, which I am confident we will, we refer the case to the district attorney's office for criminal prosecution. Deed fraud is a serious felony in North Carolina. We are talking about potential prison time." Robert took my statement, photographed all my documents, and explained that he would be visiting Brenda Whitfield's home that afternoon. He asked if I wanted to be present, but I declined. I was too angry to trust myself not to say something I would regret. Instead, I went home and started digging into Brenda Whitfield's background. A quick internet search revealed that she was indeed the HOA president of Meadowbrook Hills, a position she had held for 7 years. There were multiple complaints about her on various HOA complaint websites, with homeowners describing her as tyrannical, petty, and obsessed with control. One former resident wrote that Brenda had fined him $1,500 for painting his mailbox the wrong shade of approved green. I also found articles in the local newspaper about disputes between Meadowbrook Hills HOA and surrounding property owners. Brenda had tried to claim that a hiking trail on public land was actually private HOA property. She had attempted to fine a farmer for having a barn that was visible from HOA properties, claiming it violated their aesthetic standards even though the barn was not on HOA land. The pattern was clear. This woman believed she had authority far beyond what she actually possessed. My phone rang around 4 in the afternoon. It was Robert Chen. "Mr. Anderson, you are going to want to hear about this," he said, and I could hear the satisfaction in his voice. "I just left Mrs. Whitfield's home, and she essentially confessed to everything. She admitted to forging my signature," I asked, incredulous. "She did not see it as fraud," Robert explained. "She genuinely believes she was acting within her rights as HOA president. She claims that your 20 acres should have been part of the Meadowbrook Hills development when it was originally platted, and that the county made an error by not including it. She says she was simply correcting that mistake." "That is insane," I said. "It gets better," Robert continued. "She showed me a file cabinet full of documents related to various properties around her HOA. She has been researching land titles, tax records, and ownership histories for dozens of parcels. Your property was apparently her first attempt at actually filing a fraudulent transfer, but based on what I saw, she was planning to do the same thing to at least 6 other properties. So what happens to her now? I have referred the case to the district attorney's office with a recommendation for prosecution. The DA will likely file charges for deed fraud, forgery, and identity theft. Each of those is a felony. I have also notified the North Carolina State Bar because Mrs. Whitfield has been giving herself legal authority she does not possess, which could constitute practicing law without a license. I felt a wave of relief wash over me. And my property? We will file the paperwork to void the fraudulent transfer first thing tomorrow morning. Your deed will be restored, and this whole fraudulent transaction will be expunged from the records. I am very sorry this happened to you, Mr. Anderson, but I can assure you that we are taking this matter extremely seriously." I thanked Robert and hung up, feeling like I could breathe properly for the first time that day. But my relief was short-lived because an hour later I received a phone call from a number I did not recognize. "Mr. Anderson? This is Brenda Whitfield. I think we need to talk about this misunderstanding." I could not believe the audacity. "Misunderstanding? You forged my signature and stole my property." "I did no such thing," she said, her voice taking on that particular tone of condescension that I was beginning to recognize from all those complaint websites. "I filed the appropriate paperwork to correct a clerical error. Your land is clearly within the boundaries that should belong to Meadowbrook Hills HOA, and as president, it is my responsibility to maintain the integrity of our community. My land is 2 miles from your HOA," I said, trying to keep my voice level. "It has never been part of any homeowners association. You committed fraud." "I committed no such thing," Brenda insisted. "And if you continue to make these slanderous accusations, I will have no choice but to pursue legal action against you for defamation and harassment." "You do that," I said. "I look forward to seeing you in court." She hung up on me. I sat there, staring at my phone, marveling at how someone could be so delusional. She genuinely seemed to believe that she had done nothing wrong, that her position as HOA president gave her some kind of authority over properties that were not even part of her association. The next morning, I received a call from an assistant district attorney named Jennifer Kowalski. She wanted to meet with me to discuss the case and gather additional information for the prosecution. We scheduled a meeting for that afternoon at the DA's office. Jennifer was younger than I expected, probably in her early 30s. But she had a sharp, no-nonsense demeanor that immediately put me at ease. She explained that the DA's office was taking the case very seriously because deed fraud had been on the rise in North Carolina, and they wanted to send a strong message that this kind of crime would not be tolerated. "The challenge we face," Jennifer explained, "is that Mrs. Whitfield seems to genuinely believe she has the authority to do what she did, that could potentially be used as a defense, arguing that she lacked criminal intent. But ignorance of the law is not a defense," I said. "Generally, that is true," Jennifer agreed. "But in cases involving fraud, the prosecution has to prove that the defendant knowingly made false statements or representations. If her attorney argues that she genuinely believed she was acting within her authority, that could complicate things. So she might get away with it? I asked, feeling my anger rising again. No, I do not think so, Jennifer said quickly. We have very strong evidence. She forged your signature, which she cannot claim to have done by accident. She filed false documents with the county, knowing that you had not authorized the transfer, and based on the investigators' findings, she was planning to do the same thing to multiple other properties, which shows a pattern of deliberate conduct. I am confident we can get a conviction, but I want you to be prepared for what might be a complicated legal process. Over the next few weeks, the situation escalated in ways I could never have anticipated. First, I received a letter from the Meadowbrook Hills HOA board, signed by all 5 members, stating that they were standing behind Brenda Whitfield and supporting her actions. They claimed that the expansion of their HOA boundaries was necessary to maintain property values and community standards in the area. Then I started receiving daily citations from the HOA, claiming that my property was in violation of various covenants and restrictions. One day it would be for having tall grass, another day for lacking approved fencing, another for having construction materials visible from the road, even though my construction had not even started yet. Each citation came with a fine, usually between $100 and $500. I forwarded all of these to Robert Chen and Jennifer Kowalski, who assured me that the citations had no legal standing and that I should not pay any of them. But the harassment continued. Brenda showed up at my rental house twice, trying to serve me with HOA violation notices in person. The second time, I told her that if she came back again, I would call the police and report her for harassment. You cannot threaten me, she said, standing on my doorstep with a stack of papers in her hand. I am simply doing my job as HOA president. Your job does not extend to property that is not part of your HOA, I said. Leave now, or I am calling the police. She left, but not before leaving the stack of papers on my doorstep. When I looked through them later, I found that she had created an entire file on me, including photographs of my property taken from the road, detailed lists of supposed violations, and a calculation showing that I now owed the Meadowbrook Hills HOA over $18,000 in fines and fees. It was completely insane, but it was also extremely stressful. I was losing sleep, constantly worried about what she might do next. My construction crew was nervous about starting work on the property, afraid that the HOA might interfere or create legal complications. The whole situation was affecting my health and my peace of mind. The breaking point came in late April when I drove out to my property to check on things and found that someone had installed a chain across my driveway with a sign that read, "Private Property Meadowbrook Hills, HOA, no trespassing." I was so angry I could barely see straight. I took photographs, cut the chain with bolt cutters from my truck, and immediately called Robert Chen. "That is criminal, trespass, and property destruction," Robert said when I explained what had happened. "I am notifying the sheriff's department right now. This has gone way beyond civil fraud, Mr. Anderson. She is actively interfering with your property rights." A sheriff's deputy met me at the property within an hour. He took photographs, collected the chain and sign as evidence, and filed a report. He also drove over to Brenda Whitfield's house to speak with her, though I was not present for that conversation. Later, he called me to say that she had denied any knowledge of the chain, claiming that another HOA board member must have installed it without her authorization. "But that is obviously not true," I said. "Probably not," the deputy agreed. "But without direct evidence that she was the one who put it there, it is hard to press charges. We will include it in the overall investigation, though. The DA will have all this information when the case goes to trial." By early May, the district attorney's office had formally filed charges against Brenda Whitfield. She was indicted on 3 felony counts: deed fraud, forgery in the first degree, and identity theft. Each count carried a potential sentence of several years in prison. The arraignment was scheduled for May 15th. I attended the arraignment sitting in the back of the courtroom as Brenda appeared before the judge. She had hired an attorney, a slick-looking man in an expensive suit, who immediately began arguing that his client had acted in good faith and that this was a civil matter, not a criminal one. The judge was not having it. He reviewed the charges, listened to the brief arguments from both sides, and set a preliminary hearing for June 10th. Brenda was released on her own recognizance, but was ordered not to have any contact with me and to stay off my property. As we left the courtroom, Brenda's attorney pulled me aside. "Mr. Anderson, my client is willing to settle this matter. She will deed the property back to you, pay for any expenses you have incurred, and make a formal apology. In exchange, You would agree not to pursue civil damages and to recommend leniency to the DA's office. No, I said without hesitation. This is not about money. Your client committed fraud and she needs to face the consequences. The attorney looked disappointed but not surprised. I understand. But please know that the offer remains open if you change your mind. I walked away, feeling vindicated. This was not about revenge, but it was about justice. Brenda Whitfield had tried to steal my property, had harassed me for months, and had shown absolutely no remorse for her actions. She needed to be held accountable. The preliminary hearing in June was more detailed than the arraignment. Jennifer Kowalski presented evidence to the judge, including the forged deed, testimony from the county clerk's office, records of Brenda's HOA activities, and the chain and sign incident. The judge found that there was sufficient evidence to proceed to trial and scheduled it for August 4th. In the meantime, my life was slowly returning to normal. The fraudulent deed had been officially voided, my ownership had been restored, and I was able to move forward with my construction plans. The crew broke ground in mid-June, and I finally started to see my dream taking shape. The foundation was poured, the framing went up, and by July, the structure of my modest two-bedroom home was visible from the road. But the drama was not over yet. In late July, I received a call from Jennifer Kowalski with surprising news. Mr. Anderson, we have arrested 4 members of the Meadowbrook Hills HOA board, she said. It turns out that Brenda Whitfield was not acting alone. The other board members knew about her plans and actively helped her research properties and prepare documents. We have emails, text messages, and meeting minutes that show this was a coordinated effort. I was stunned. So this was like a conspiracy? Essentially, yes, Jennifer said. They saw it as a way to expand their HOA's influence and increase property values for their own homes. They genuinely believed they were acting in the best interests of their community, but what they were actually doing was planning to commit fraud on a massive scale. If we had not caught this when we did, they would have targeted at least 6 other property owners over the next year. The trial in August was intense. I testified on the first day, explaining how I had purchased the property, describing the shock of receiving the letter from the county assessor, and detailing the months of harassment that followed. Jennifer walked me through each piece of evidence methodically, and I could see the jury paying close attention. Brenda's attorney tried to paint her as a dedicated community volunteer who had made an honest mistake, someone who cared deeply about property values and neighborhood standards. But when Jennifer cross-examined Brenda, the facade crumbled quickly. Mrs. Whitfield, you testified that you believed Mr. Anderson's property should have been part of your HOA, Jennifer said. But you also admit that you never spoke to him before filing the deed transfer, correct? That is correct, Brenda said stiffly. And you admit that you forged his signature on the quitclaim deed? I needed his signature to file the paperwork, Brenda said, as if this was the most reasonable thing in the world. And since the property rightfully belonged to the HOA, I did not see the need to bother him with unnecessary meetings. So you forged his signature without his knowledge or permission? I provided the signature that was needed for the correct paperwork to be filed, Brenda said, her voice getting sharper. The property was always meant to be part of Meadowbrook Hills. The county made an error in the original platting, and I was simply correcting that error. Do you have any documentation showing that the county made an error? Jennifer asked. It is obvious from looking at the boundaries, Brenda insisted. Anyone with any understanding of proper community planning would see that. So no, you do not have any documentation? Brenda's face flushed red. The documentation is not the point. The point is that I have a responsibility to protect property values and maintain standards in our community. Even on property that is not part of your community. It should be part of our community, but it is not, is it? Only because of a clerical error that I was correcting. The exchange went on like this for nearly an hour, with Brenda becoming increasingly defensive and argumentative. By the end of her testimony, it was clear that she still did not believe she had done anything wrong. She saw herself as a victim, someone who was being persecuted for trying to do the right thing. The jury deliberated for less than 3 hours. They found Brenda Whitfield guilty on all 3 felony counts. The 4 other HOA board members, who were being tried separately, would later also be convicted of conspiracy to commit fraud. The sentencing hearing was scheduled for September. Jennifer warned me that Brenda would likely receive a relatively lenient sentence because she had no prior criminal record and because the property had been returned to me without any permanent damage. but she assured me that Brenda would face serious consequences. At the sentencing hearing in mid-September, the judge listened to impact statements from me and from several other property owners who had been targeted by the Meadowbrook Hills HOA board. One man described how Brenda had threatened to file liens against his property if he did not remove a shed that she claimed violated HOA standards, even though his property was not part of the HOA. A woman testified about how the HOA had tried to fine her for having the wrong color curtains visible from the street, again on a property that was not part of the association. The judge's expression grew increasingly stern as he listened to these testimonies. When it was time for sentencing, he did not mince words. "Mrs. Whitfield, what you did was not a simple mistake or an error in judgment," he said. "You deliberately forged another person's signature, filed fraudulent documents with the county, and attempted to steal property that did not belong to you. You showed no remorse throughout this process, and even now, I do not believe you fully understand the gravity of your actions." He sentenced her to 4 years in prison, with the possibility of parole after 2 years. He also ordered her to pay restitution to me for my legal expenses and the costs associated with clearing the fraudulent deed. The other 4 HOA board members received sentences ranging from 18 months to 3 years, depending on their level of involvement in the conspiracy. As Brenda was led out of the courtroom, she looked at me with such hatred that it made my skin crawl, but I also felt an overwhelming sense of relief. This nightmare was finally over. The aftermath of the trial was interesting. The Meadowbrook Hills HOA essentially imploded. With their entire board either in prison or awaiting sentencing, the remaining homeowners voted to dissolve the association entirely. Many of them came forward to apologize to me, explaining that they had no idea what Brenda and the board had been planning and that they were horrified by her actions. Some of them asked if I would consider joining a new, more reasonable HOA if they formed one, but I politely declined. I had seen enough of homeowners associations to last a lifetime. My house was completed in October, and I moved in just as the leaves were starting to change colors. The view from my front porch was everything I had dreamed it would be, looking out over rolling hills with the mountains in the distance. The creek in the back of the property was perfect for fishing, and I had already started planning a small orchard for next spring. One afternoon in late October, I was sitting on my porch when a car pulled up my driveway. I tensed for a moment, wondering if this was going to be another problem, but then I recognized Robert Chen getting out of the vehicle. "Mr. Anderson," he said, walking up to the porch, "I hope I am not intruding. I was in the area and wanted to stop by to see how you were doing." "I am doing well," I said, gesturing for him to join me on the porch. "Would you like some coffee?" We sat and talked for a while about the case and its resolution. Robert told me that the county had implemented new procedures to prevent this kind of fraud in the future, including additional verification steps for deed transfers and mandatory notifications to property owners when any documents are filed affecting their land. "What you went through was a nightmare," Robert said, "but some good has come from it. We are now much better equipped to catch and prevent this kind of fraud." "I am glad something positive came from it," I said, "though I wish I had not had to go through it in the first place." "I understand," Robert said, "but I want you to know that your willingness to pursue this case all the way through prosecution made a real difference. A lot of victims of property fraud give up because the legal process is so complicated and stressful. You stuck with it, and as a result, a dangerous criminal is off the streets and other potential victims have been protected." After Robert left, I sat on my porch and watched the sun set behind the mountains. I thought about everything that had happened over the past 6 months, from that first shocking letter to the trial and conviction. It had been one of the most stressful periods of my life, but I had come through it and I had won. More importantly, I had stood up for what was right. Brenda Whitfield had tried to bully me, to steal from me, to make me give up and go away. But I had fought back, not just for myself, but for all the other property owners she had targeted or planned to target. The justice system had worked, slowly and imperfectly, but it had worked. As November arrived and the weather turned colder, I settled into my new home and my new life. I joined a local woodworking club, started volunteering at the community center in Asheville, and made friends with my neighbors, all of whom lived on their own independent properties without any HOA dictating what color they could paint their mailboxes. I heard through the grapevine that Brenda had filed an appeal of her conviction, but Jennifer Kowalski assured me that it would almost certainly be denied. The evidence against her had been overwhelming, and she had essentially confessed on the witness stand. She would serve her time, and hopefully, she would learn something from the actions. Though I was not holding my breath, the former members of the Meadowbrook Hills HOA actually started a support group for people who had suffered under the tyranny of the previous board. They invited me to speak at one of their meetings, and I shared my story with a room full of people who had their own tales of unreasonable fines, arbitrary rules, and petty enforcement actions. It was therapeutic to realize that I was not alone, that many people had dealt with similar situations, though few as extreme as what I had experienced. One of the attendees, an older gentleman named Frank, pulled me aside after the meeting. "You know what the worst part was?" he said. "It was not even the fines or the harassment. It was the feeling that you had no control over your own property, that someone else could just decide what you could and could not do with the land you paid for. That is what Brenda never understood. She thought being HOA president made her some kind of queen, but all it really meant was that she had a responsibility to serve her community, not rule over it." His words stuck with me. That was exactly what had been so infuriating about the whole situation. Brenda had seen her position as giving her power rather than responsibility. She had believed that her vision for the community was more important than the rights of individual property owners. She had been so convinced of her own righteousness that she had been willing to commit serious crimes to achieve her goals. As December arrived and the first snow began to fall on my 20 acres, I realized that I had everything I had originally wanted. I had my land free and clear with no one to answer to but myself. I had a comfortable home that I had built exactly the way I wanted it. I had peace and quiet, beautiful views, and the satisfaction of knowing that I had stood up to a bully and won. The holidays were quiet that year. I invited some of my new friends over for a Christmas dinner, and we sat around my table, eating and laughing and sharing stories. One of my guests asked me if I regretted buying the property, given everything that had happened with Brenda and the HOA. "Not for a second," I said. "This land, this home, this was my dream, and I was not going to let anyone take it away from me." In January, I received a letter from the North Carolina Department of Corrections. Brenda Whitfield had been transferred to the minimum security prison in Raleigh to begin serving her sentence. The letter included information about the victim notification program, which would alert me if she was released early or if there were any changes to her status. I filed the letter away, hoping I would never need to think about Brenda Whitfield again. But life had one more surprise in store for me. In February, I received a call from an attorney representing the homeowners of the former Meadowbrook Hills development. They wanted to file a civil lawsuit against Brenda and the other board members, seeking damages for the harm they had caused to property values and the reputation of the neighborhood. They asked if I would be willing to join the lawsuit as a plaintiff. I thought about it for a few days before deciding to decline. I had already been through a criminal trial, had testified, had relived all the stress and anger of those months. The restitution order from the criminal cases would cover my direct expenses, and I had no desire to spend more time in courtrooms or dealing with lawyers. I just wanted to move on with my life. The civil lawsuit went forward without me, and from what I heard, it was eventually settled out of court. The homeowners received some compensation, though probably not as much as they had hoped for. Brenda had already declared bankruptcy, claiming that her legal expenses had wiped her out financially. I suspected she had hidden assets somewhere, but I was not interested in pursuing it further. By March, I felt like I could finally put the whole experience behind me. I started working on my orchard, planting young apple and peach trees that would take years to mature, but would eventually provide fruit for me and my neighbors. I expanded my chicken coop and added a few more hens. I built a workshop in one of my outbuildings and started taking on small electrical jobs in the area, more to stay sharp and connected to the community than because I needed the money. One warm afternoon in early April, almost exactly a year after the most intense part of the conflict with Brenda, I was working in my garden when a car pulled up. A woman I did not recognize got out and walked toward me, looking nervous. "Mr. Anderson?" she asked. "My name is Margaret. I was one of the homeowners in Meadowbrook Hills. I wanted to come by and apologize in person for everything that happened to you." I stood up, brushing dirt off my hands. "You do not need to apologize. You were not involved in what Brenda did." "But I voted for her," Margaret said, her eyes welling up with tears. "Every election I voted to keep her as president because I thought she was protecting our property values." I thought she was just being thorough, just making sure our neighborhood stayed nice. I had no idea she was planning to do something like this, but I feel responsible anyway because I enabled her. We all did. I invited Margaret to sit on my porch and we talked for over an hour. She told me about how the neighborhood had changed since the HOA dissolved, how people were actually talking to each other now, having block parties, helping each other out instead of sending violation notices. She said it felt like a real community for the first time in years. Brenda always said she was protecting the community, Margaret said, but what she was really doing was keeping us all afraid and divided. No one wanted to get on her bad side, so we all just kept our heads down and followed the rules, no matter how ridiculous they were. "Why did you come here today?" I asked gently. "Because I needed to look you in the eye and tell you I am sorry," Margaret said. "What happened to you was wrong, and even though I did not know about it, I was part of the system that allowed it to happen. I wanted you to know that I am sorry, and that I am glad you fought back. You saved a lot of other people from going through what you went through." After Margaret left, I sat on my porch for a long time, thinking about forgiveness and responsibility, and the ways that people can enable bad behavior without even realizing it. I did not blame Margaret or the other homeowners for what Brenda had done. They had been victims too, in a different way. As spring turned to summer and then to fall again, my life settled into a comfortable routine. I had my home, my land, my projects, and my community. The construction crew that had built my house hired me to help with electrical work on other projects, so I had steady income and interesting work. I dated a bit, though nothing serious developed. I was content with my life, maybe for the first time in years. In October, almost 18 months after the initial fraud was discovered, I received a call from Jennifer Kowalski. Brenda had been up for a parole hearing, but it had been denied. She would serve at least another 6 months before being eligible again. "I wanted you to know," Jennifer said, because the parole board's decision cited her continued lack of remorse as a factor. Even after all this time, she still insists she did nothing wrong. She told the board that she was the victim of a miscarriage of justice. "That does not surprise me," I said. "Brenda was never going to admit she was wrong." "Well, the good news is that means she will serve more of her sentence," Jennifer said. "And when she does get out, she will be on probation for several years with strict conditions. If she violates those conditions in any way, she goes right back to prison." As I hung up the phone, I realized that I felt no satisfaction from learning that Brenda's parole had been denied. I did not want her to suffer. I just wanted to never have to deal with her again. I hoped that prison was teaching her something, that maybe eventually she would understand why what she did was wrong. But even if she never did, it did not matter to me anymore. She was part of my past, not my present or my future. The second anniversary of buying my property came in November. I marked the occasion by hosting a large gathering at my home, inviting everyone who had helped me through the ordeal. Robert Chen, Jennifer Kowalski, the members of the former Meadowbrook Hills HOA who had reached out to apologize, my neighbors, and my new friends from the community center and woodworking club. We ate barbecue, drank beer, and celebrated not just my victory over fraud, but the broader idea that ordinary people could stand up to bullies and win. Robert made a toast, thanking me for my courage and persistence. Jennifer joked that I had made her job easy by being such a good witness. My neighbor Frank gave a speech about the importance of property rights and individual liberty. As the sun set and people started to leave, I stood on my porch and looked out over my land. The trees I had planted were small but growing. The garden had produced well over the summer. My chickens were healthy and laying eggs regularly. The house was exactly what I had envisioned, comfortable and well built. More than that, I had proven something important to myself. When someone had tried to take away what was mine, I had not backed down. I had fought through the legal system, had endured months of stress and harassment, and had ultimately prevailed. It was not the retirement experience I had planned, but in some ways, it was better. I knew now that I could handle whatever life threw at me. As winter arrived again, and I settled in for the cold months ahead, I found myself thinking about writing down my story. Not for publication or attention, but just to have a record of what had happened, a reminder of what I had overcome. I spent December and January writing, filling notebook after notebook with details of the fraud, the investigation, the trial, and the aftermath. When I finished, I had over 100 pages of handwritten notes. I read through them once, then filed them away. Maybe someday I would share the story more widely, use it to warn other property owners about the dangers of HOA overreach and deed fraud. But for now, It was enough to know that the story had an ending, and that the ending was a good one. In March, 2 years after the fraud was discovered, I received a final piece of closure. The North Carolina State Bar had completed its investigation into Brenda's actions and had issued a report recommending changes to how HOAs are regulated and overseen. The report specifically cited my case as an example of what could go wrong when HOA boards operated without proper checks and balances. The state legislature introduced a bill that would require HOA boards to carry insurance, undergo regular audits, and provide homeowners with better mechanisms for challenging board decisions. The bill was named the Property Owner Protection Act, and while it did not mention me by name, I knew that my experience had been one of the driving forces behind it. When the bill passed in May and was signed into law by the governor, I felt a sense of pride that I had never expected. What had started as a personal nightmare had turned into something that would protect other property owners across the state. It would not prevent all fraud or abuse, but it would make it harder for people like Brenda to operate with impunity. In June, I got a letter from Brenda. It had been forwarded through the prison system and the victim notification program. I almost threw it away without reading it, but curiosity got the better of me. The letter was short and did not contain an apology. Instead, Brenda wrote that she hoped I was happy with myself for destroying her life. She claimed that everything she had done had been for the good of the community and that I had been selfish and short-sighted. She said that history would vindicate her actions and prove that she had been right all along. I read the letter once, then tossed it in my fireplace and watched it burn. Some people never learned, never changed, never grew. Brenda was apparently one of those people, but that was her problem, not mine. As summer arrived and I celebrated 3 years of owning my property, I realized that I had finally achieved what I set out to do. I had my retirement dream, my peaceful life on 20 beautiful acres. The path to get here had been much more difficult than I anticipated, but the destination was worth it. I planted more trees that summer, expanded my garden, and started raising a few goats in addition to my chickens. I took on a part-time teaching position at the community college, showing younger people how to do residential electrical work. I joined the local planning commission, wanting to give back to the county that had supported me through the fraud case. My life was full, busy and satisfying. Every morning I woke up in my own home, on my own land, beholden to no one but myself. Every evening I sat on my porch and watched the sunset over the mountains, grateful for the peace and beauty that surrounded me. The nightmare with Brenda Whitfield had taught me important lessons about standing up for myself, trusting the legal system even when it moved slowly, and the importance of community support. It had also taught me to be wary of anyone who claimed to have authority over my life or my property. I would never take my freedom or my rights for granted again. In September, I heard that Brenda had finally been granted parole. She was released with strict conditions. She could not serve on any HOA board, could not contact me or any of the other victims, and had to complete community service and attend counseling sessions. I hoped that she would use her freedom wisely, that she would finally learn from her mistakes. But even if she did not, I knew that I was safe. The legal system had protected me, the community had supported me, and I had proven to myself that I could overcome even the most outrageous injustice. Whatever happened to Brenda from here on out was her responsibility, not mine. As the leaves began to change color again and another autumn arrived, I found myself at peace in a way I'd never experienced before. The fraud, the trial, the stress, all of it had been worth it because it had led me to this moment, this place, this life. I stood on my porch one evening, a cup of coffee in my hand, and looked out over my 20 acres. The land was mine, truly and completely mine, and no one would ever take it away from me again. The house I had built stood solid and strong, a testament to my determination and my refusal to give up. In the distance, I could see my neighbor's lights beginning to come on as evening settled in. We were not part of an HOA. We were just people living our lives on our own terms, respecting each other's property and privacy. It was the way things should be, the way things had always been meant to be. I raised my coffee cup in a silent toast to myself, to everyone who had helped me, and to the simple but profound freedom of owning property without interference or harassment. The nightmare was over, and the dream had finally come true.